Welcome everyone to the second session of the Meet Our Cousins event, Deciphering the Behavior of Orangutans. I am Andrea Knox. I'm the International Communications and Research Advisor at the Borneo Orangutan Survival Foundation, and it is my pleasure to introduce you to two very special guests we have with us here today. We have Dr. Felicity Oram, who is the Project Director of the Pongo Alliance, the Program Development Advisor of Bhutan's Kinabatsang Orangutan Conservation Program, and a member of the IUCN Primate Specialist Group for Human-Primate Interactions. And then I also have with me Sheila Kharismadewi, who is the Coordinator for Monitoring and Scientific Survey of Biodiversity for the Sumatran Orangutan Conservation Program under Yayasan Ecosystem Lestari, and is currently based in North Sumatra. So welcome to you both. Thank you for joining us for this very special Orangutan Day event.
It's wonderful to be here, and happy International Orangutan Day, everyone, all over.
Yeah, it's really nice to be here. Hello, everyone.
So I just want to jump straight into it, but with an easy question so our audience can get to know you both. I think you're both new to the BOSS Foundation virtual events that we've been launching all year. So if you could both just tell us all a little bit, maybe how you came to work with orangutans and what your research focused on. Maybe start with you, Felicity.
Okay, well, I started for a long part of my career as actually a zookeeper looking after orangutans in captivity. And then I got the opportunity to work in the field, and I really jumped with both feet to that. And I was able to work on a master's and a PhD with fantastic collaborators in Bhutan, and the local staff there that taught me an awful lot about wild orangutans. And now I look actually specializing orangutans in human changed environments. So orangutans living in degraded forests and forests that are very fragmented, mostly by oil palm plantations. So I work how orangutans are adapting to that type of change. And then I equally, because really this is all about people as well, I work with the people to try to see if we can work together to keep wild orangutans in the Kinabatangan region of Sabah, which is North Borneo.
That's fantastic. Here at BOSS Foundation, we really resonate with that. So it's not a orangutan or environmental problem and not a human problem. It's a problem for all of us. And the solution should benefit orangutans and people alike. That's great to hear. You, Sheila?
I'm a very rookie actually compared to Felicity about orangutans because at first it started from my undergraduate thesis. So I study about mother and infant orangutans for my undergraduate. So I graduated in 2018. So I basically just worked with orangutans for about 4 years. So after I graduated from my university, I started working in the field as well from in Batang Toru research stations. I work as a manager there, so I basically live in the forest and then follow the wild population of Tapanuli orangutans. And my research is basically focused on the mother and infant behavior, especially in the foraging skill learning, learning about how the immature Tapanuli orangutans acquire their ability to forage and then how to process their foods. And as the longer I'm in the camp, I also learn and studies about their relationship within the mother and the infants.
That's amazing. And I'm happy you pointed it out, Sheila, that you and Felicity, your different stages of your careers, but that's part of what makes this so exciting, right? Bringing people from different backgrounds and different stages of life in their career and all coming together to try to find a solution to a complex problem. We need people coming together.
Well, it's wonderful also to, and makes me very happy, Sheila, that you're interested in mother and child and growing up orangutan, because that's very much the sort of main interest that I have. And what I did for my master's is quite a bit similar to what you did for your bachelor's work and the work that you're doing. And so, I mean, it's all really about making a world for a future for those orangutans growing up and learning how they I had quite a lot of experience in captivity, and those orangutans don't have to feed themselves. So learning how they learn to feed and learn to forage on their own is really a core part of my master's as well. So it's really great joy that I have some young person who's interested to do what I'm interested in.
Yeah, it's really interesting, especially if we see the connection between the mother and the infant, and then we see their level of attention, their level of communication and interaction between the mother and the infant. It's really interesting to learn. It's like we're seeing reflecting ourselves in them. So yeah, it's really really interesting.
It's such a close bond, but since you both do focus on such similar research, could you share with the audience how important is the mother's role in infants learning how to survive and in their development? What are they needed for? How does that work? Could you share what you've learned during your time with orangutans? That's a big question.
Well, I think that the simple answer is everything. Because an orangutan raises one baby all the way through 0 to 7, and then has another one, but the other one, that other one is still around from 7 to 14. So unlike people and chimpanzees, we don't have what's called stacking of births. So we're really taking one all the way through the process, one at a time. So the relationship between a mother orangutan and her offspring is very close, kind of what Sheila hinted at when she was saying before. And I really think that orangutan babies aren't born with a lot of skills to survive in the forest. So it's all about learning that from their mother.
Yeah, it's so true, because you can say that since the orangutans live in a solitary lifestyle, they only interact with, when they're first born, their early interaction is only with the mother. So basically the mother is the role model. Everything that they need to learn to survive when they become independent, they learn from the mother. So the role, more importance, the mother is really an important role in the infant life of orangutans, because there's several hypotheses that we said that the orangutans needs, in order to survive when they become independent, they need to learn how to find the food, they need to learn what they can eat or what they couldn't eat, and then they need to learn how to move, and then they need to learn how to build nests. Those are the several crucial skills they need to acquire when they grow up, and all of that they learn from the mother.
So I think all these skills are so important for orangutans. Have any of you ever seen cases, can these young orangutans survive without their mothers? Or it's really, crucial that they have them there? Like, have you seen, what's the earliest you've seen a young orangutan leave their mother in the wild, or does that not really seen? Are you really only seeing them with their mothers until they're 7, 8 years old?
In my experience, they don't. It's a little bit of, well, it's a bit dramatic, but it before 7, it doesn't happen naturally. In the field site where I work, the real sort of barrier, or not the barrier, I mean the sort of landmark that they're gone from the stage of all depending on their mother to being a bit more independent, is when they make their own first nest, and that's at the time of weaning, which is around 7.5 years old, and then shortly thereafter the mother will often have another baby. But at the same time, the 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, they're still around in their mother's area. And so but the female will stay in her mother's area for the rest of her life, and the male will leave, usually around 15, the mother's area. So the real sort of landmark of growing up is that time when they make their first nest. And I've seen 2 times when that has happened. I've been really lucky to witness that. And one time it looked almost magical, to the point that we thought maybe there was something wrong. All of a sudden, the daughter, which was quite a dependent daughter, went off and didn't come back in the evening, and she wasn't very far away. But another time, it seemed like the daughter was a little bit trying to get back into her mother's nest. Mother was getting out, sitting outside her nest, and it was like this back and forth process, and then she sort of was kind of, if I can be anthropomorphic, say she sort of stamped off and made her own nest. So it's different. There's a lot of different personalities too. But to answer your question, I haven't. The normal process is to stay until they build their own nest, and that's usually around 7 years old.
Yeah,
in the wild.
In the wild, I also never witnessed a case of an infant growing up without a mother, or maybe we don't know if they're adopted by another adult orangutans, but usually the case, the mother is really protective to the baby, and the mother is gonna do anything to ensure the survival of the offspring. And I don't know, but in the rehabilitation side, maybe we've seen like young orangutans being like with their, I don't know, they have partners maybe like orphan orangutans in the rehabilitation. How does that work, Felicity?
Well, I don't actually work in rehabilitation that much, and so I think that well, let's see how to take a step back to answer originally the question, which is, I think it's very difficult for orangutan to survive without a mother below the age of 3 or 4. I do know of some cases of orangutans that we didn't know for sure because we didn't know exactly how old they were, but they seemed like they were younger than they should be, that were alone. And so I don't think that there's cases where you don't have orphans. And in fact, I do know some cases of where we do have orphans, but I don't know. I don't think it's easy for them. But I think that if they're maybe 5 or 6, or closer to 7, they can maybe do okay, because of course they're also living in the wild. They're living in a community of their aunties, their female cousins. So really, though orangutans are solitary, they're still living in a community. So perhaps they are supported enough. But I think that if you're much younger, and certainly below the age of 3, where you're really depending on the nutritional support from your mother, because really from about the whole first year, you're being carried by your mother mostly as a baby. And then between 1 and 3, wild orangutans really focus on learning how to move around. And but they play with food, but they're really not interested in eating it that much. But after 3, they become much more focused on learning what to eat. So it's sort of the different stages of focus. But so I think that if you're between 4 and 7, you're going to be deficient a little bit on foraging skill if you lost your mother, but you're going to have something. But below that, I think you're quite in difficulty. But and of course, many of the orangutans that come into rehabilitation centers are very young, and so they probably wouldn't survive in the wild on their own.
Yeah, it's true. I see several cases of the close relationship between the orangutans, like the first offspring and then the second offspring.
Yeah.
Like when the mother have second offspring, the first offspring sometimes came around and then play with the second offspring. That happens a lot in the wild, especially if the offspring is a female. The male, they don't really come around, but the female offspring usually come back to the mother and then sometimes play with their sister or their brother. It's really interesting.
Yes, and that's amazing. In fact, as a former zookeeper, that was always really amazing to me, because zookeepers always wonder, how do female orangutans learn how to be a mother if they're just alone with their mother, and then And of course, that's exactly how they learn. And I completely agree with you. And I see the same thing where it's much, the sons come back and play too, but it's really the daughters who are quite interested. And so this is the time to be learning what you do. And it's really, it's wonderful to watch. And
happy to say we have that with our rehabilitant ones as well that are already released into the forest, and we have mothers of multiple children. We see it with the sons as well, but the daughters definitely stick around. Not all different personalities, but you too. You guys actually both touched upon why I asked that question in the first place and why it came to mind. Because of the orangutans in our rehabilitation centers, most of them come in well before the age of 7. We're talking 1 or 2 years old. So we need what we call our human surrogate mothers to fulfill the role of their mother so they can survive in the wild one day. But in this process, we're constantly trying to improve it because obviously human surrogate mothers are not orangutans. So we're always learning. So from your experience, what would you say have you seen the most effective way in which young and mature orangutans learn and acquire skills? Is it just through watching or mimicry? Are there other learning tools at their disposal that you see them using in wild situations with their actual orangutan mothers? Or with their siblings too. We always focus on that as well. In our forest school, we are more social, but we like them learning from each other, from their pupils, in lieu of their mother.
Well, I think that they learn mostly by watching. I think there's different personalities in the different orangutan mothers. Mostly, so I think it's really watching, but it's sort of, they don't do sort of active lessons, but you can tell that they're giving the opportunity. So the young will, when they're really small and they can't open any fruit or anything on their own, they take it out of their mother's mouth, and they're sort of all over. And some mothers are more tolerant of that than others. Some sort of say, "You sit down and I'll give you some." Others don't mind, their baby all over their face. And I have noticed it's kind of be a personality difference with that. So I think it's not exactly passive in that the mother's not doing anything, but she's not sort of sitting them down and saying, this is how you use a knife and fork kind of thing. So so that's and then my personal feeling is that orangutans are not as focused on learning from a sibling or a conspecific, so somebody the same age as them, as other apes are. I mean, I think gorillas learn a lot from playing with their other other ones about the same age. I think orangutans have a little bit of a disadvantage at that. I mean, that's all you can do in a rehabilitation center is and they do form like real buddies, and I'm sure they benefit from that. They're really intelligent. They know, they're adaptive. But I think it's a little bit less natural for them to be learning from somebody their own age. They're quite focused on learning from one individual, like their mother, in my opinion. But I shouldn't let Sheila have her.
Yeah, it's exactly true that from my experience, orangutan is learning by observing. So they watch closely of what the mothers do, and then they try it themselves. Or if they couldn't do that yet, the mother's gonna allow them to steal the food, or the mother share the food, like Felicity said. So it's exactly true that um, basically what baby orangutan does to learn is by watching, by seeing what they do, seeing what they eat, seeing how they move, and then the mother, they know the capacity of the baby. So um, as younger as the baby, the mother tolerance is higher, and then later on, when the baby is already like, if let's say the infant's like 5, 6, 7, and then the level of tolerance is gonna way lower than what it used to be. And then the mothers is also helping with the locomotion, like how to crossing the trees, and then like helping them to get to one tree to another trees. So Yeah, and then it's also what from what I see, what the sibling does uh with the another babies, they usually just play. I mean, they don't really learning anything at the activity. They don't really see how they eat because basically it's just the mother.
It's interesting you brought up locomotion. So, our forest school lessons, we focus on a lot. A lot of it is foraging, right? That's most of what an orangutan spends their day doing. It's recorded orangutans have eaten over 2,000 different species of food items in the forest across all different populations. Um, so our surrogate mothers can show them how to peel back rattan, how to find ants, smash logs for termites, all of that. When it comes to locomotion, that's a bigger challenge, right? We do have them climbing trees, encouraging orangutans to go up. We found fruit kebabs too, fruit on sticks higher up, but teaching those orangutans how to climb is really important, right? They live their entire lives in the trees. The world's largest arboreal mammal is a fact we like to throw out there a lot, and it's surprising. They're much bigger than any bird you see. Do you have, I guess maybe what I'd ask for advice for surrogate mothers or anyone who's trying to teach an orangutan how to climb, essentially, or what's important in that process for them learning and becoming competent and confident in the canopy when they're so far off the ground?
Well, I think it's not so much climbing. And it's very well. It's extremely difficult for human to teach an orangutan to be an arboreal animal, and that's a major challenge. But the thing is that it's really crossing between trees and understanding what branch and the sort of architecture of trees and how to negotiate through that arboreal pathway. That's the thing that when I look at rehabilitants, in fact, sometimes when I'm in Saba, we have in some places that are near Sepalok, in some oil palm plantations, we have rehabilitants and wild. Right? We have to, and when you're going to mediate a situation, it's very different if it's a rehabilitant versus if it's a wild orangutan. And one of the things that gives me a clue it might be a rehabilitant is that they're not very good at moving and crossing between things. They're not as good. And so I have to say, I that's one of my tools that I use to say, I don't think this animal it might not be a wild animal. Because one thing that I suppose the most active teaching thing that I've ever seen a mother do is it seems like they have rules with about 3-year-olds that the mother will sway the tree so that one tree can cross to the other, and the young one's job is to climb up higher and cross over first, because the top of when she's swaying the tree, it's going to sway, and then it's going to go over, and the baby's got to. And I've seen a mother go sway. Now she looks up, like, you go, the baby doesn't go. Okay, so it's sway again, go. And that's the most sort of overt, like, okay, you were supposed to go then, kind of clue. So I think that sort of climbing is one thing and is important, but that sort of making that, if anything, I could say for advice for rehab is somehow working, sort of that sort of horizontal pathway. How do you teach that? Is the thing through the trees, moving through the trees and between the trees.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm sure what you have to add, Sheila.
That's mostly what the mothers do in the wild. So they bend branches, and then if the gap is really far from one tree to another tree, and then the baby couldn't cross it, the mother's gonna bend a little bit bend so the baby can cross over, or like Felicity said, they're gonna swing one like small trees, and then so the baby can goes up and then cross over. Or sometimes as they grow older, the mothers like they if the baby cried, sometimes the baby cried because they couldn't cross over, right?
Yeah.
When the baby cried, the mothers take few times to wait, like you could figure this out on your own. If you couldn't, like for such a period of time, then I'm gonna come back for you. But you have to think for yourself for a few moments before I'm gonna help you. So that also happens in the wild. So we when I see that, I understand that the mother is giving the baby the opportunity to think for themselves how to figure out the canopy, how they can cross it, how to solve that problem. So if the baby really couldn't, then the mother's gonna help, but the mother's really giving that chance for the baby to think.
Yeah, which makes me think from like my personal experience. You mentioned your mother's being less tolerant when the babies are older and things too. I've seen, and I wonder if you two have both seen it, mothers being less tolerant and giving more time to let them cry and forget themselves when it's a second or third offspring too, right? Coddling more the first, and then when you haven't seen that one, Felicity.
Well, no, I have. I've had the great privilege to see mother with different offspring, and it's pretty amazing. Well, I mean, we think it's amazing. It's normal. You treat each baby is different, and I've seen a mother with a baby who is quite clingy, and more sort of teary. And then the following baby was completely opposite, was very confident. In fact, she was holding it back, and watch her be kind of quite different with quite different offspring. So they adjust to what the personality type is and the skill level of the baby. But exactly what Sheila says, I also watch that kind of instruction of, especially with moving. Exactly that sort of sense of, well, I think you can figure it out, sort of that, and maybe you can. And if you really can't, then the arm goes out. Okay, I'll give you a bridge, and then the baby knows it's been, and so that's.
Yeah, I'm trying to imagine how we can get human surrogate mothers to do bridging in trees. I think it'd be really hard with feet that grasp.
Well, I think I think encouraging them to cross between the trees, because what I have observed is they're trying to get them to go up in the trees, which is quite difficult because everything that's fun is happening on the ground for a rehabilitant. So getting them up, but then they just want them up. And what you really need to do is then start walking away so that they start having to follow you side across, to actually have to figure out how to cross. And maybe I know that in some places they have people up on climbing gear and all that kind of stuff, and at least you would have some idea of what the pathways might be, or even putting pathways up higher. Because I mean, orangutan, even in captivity, orangutans are really 3D oriented. They like and so they do have that naturally in them, sort of to think of the world in this very sort of 3D puzzle. So encouraging that somehow, I think, would be helpful. And
yeah, I agree.
So would you, one thing we always say, I mentioned, we always want to get better, and the way to do that is by looking at where weaknesses are in a program. Would you, I guess from your experience, peg locomotion as the biggest weakness of rehabilitation programs? Or is there anything else we should also be including?
Well, I think that what people do in rehabilitation is hard work. And I think it's very honorable work, and it can be very sad, and so my heart is very much with you. But I think that it's very difficult to replace an orangutan mother. So I think, yes, locomotion is a big thing, and I sort of was focusing on that. But I don't think I think that rehabilitants probably don't have as broad a knowledge of what there is to eat out there, and orangutans tend not to be very experimental. I mean, monkeys are very good at being experimental, so if they watch monkeys, maybe that's good. And orangutans are really smart and adaptable, so they can learn more things. But it is maybe their repertoire of what to eat is not as big. So I mean, so all in all, I think that really the wild population is our reservoir of orangutans. Our rehabilitant population are there because we are doing the right thing by them, and we need to do the right thing by them and do our very best. But we can't really think of them as the is fully functional population. The fully functional population is still the wild population, and that is not that there can be amazing things happen, or not that the work that you do isn't very honorable, but I think we all have to face that reservoir of knowledge and cultural knowledge and the depth of knowledge that a wild orangutan has is really important, especially in changing environments, and what we're all facing, changing environments. Yeah, I mean, I think the process has really improved tremendously over time. We do it better and better, but I think it's a very challenging job.
Yeah, I agree. It is really difficult because what the mother orangutans do is not just showing them what they can eat or how to eat it, but they also telling them where to find it and when to find it. So in the forest, they have the phenological cycle. Sometimes there are fruit here, sometimes there are fruit here, and then when let's say the fruit availability is low, what they can eat, what other fallback food that they can consume beside fruits, and that's also what the wild mother orangutan teach to their babies, to their infants. So let's say we see that the orangutans in the rehabilitation already, I mean, they eat well, they move well, but then when we release them in the wild, I don't really see how we can ensure that they know where to move, and then they know where to find their food, and then what they should do if there's fruit shortage in their area. Like, that's also be a challenge, actually.
Referring to the site-specific knowledge, especially for females where they stay in the same area as their mother. But for males, if you think about it, since they are ranging away from their original home range that they grew up in, do you think it's a different skill set they almost acquire, where they're able to explore this new area that they don't know where the fruiting trees are yet? Because orangutans have one of the best temporal spatial maps of any animal on Earth, right? They can remember where the tree is and when it blooms. But when males move into new areas, they don't have that. I think there's something you can maybe tap into there to help rehabilitate orangutans once they're released and they are in a new area, apply those skills more robustly.
I think that's a really interesting thing, and actually in the work that I've been doing now, since my PhD and master's work was all in the protected forest in a fixed border study site, so that was mostly females. So and that's the problem of all fixed border study sites. The males are passing through, so you don't know them as well as you know the females. But and what I'm doing now, which is working in the bigger landscape, I am learning much more about males, and I realize that we don't know very much about males. And I do think that particularly, I think unflanged males in particular are definitely more risk taking and more maybe don't know what they're doing, because one of the things is when you mostly study females, you go, wow, these orangutans know exactly what they're doing. They know exactly what to do in the day. They have a very good routine. And to a similar degree of flange males, you always have this idea when you see them in the plantations that they know where they're going. They have a plan. Now, unflanged males, which I'm now experiencing more and more, some of them you go, I don't think they have any idea what they're going to do next. So which is a kind of a new experience to watching, obviously a wild orangutan that's kind of like sort of, he's going around in circles here. I don't know what he's doing. So and definitely doing things that you wouldn't expect them to do, or doing things that going round and round again the same day into somebody's orchard. It's not smart, but this unflanged male is doing it, those kind of things. So I do think you make a good point, Andrea, that when we're looking especially at female orangutans that in the wild live in their ancestral home with their female social structure, they are in a very tight community actually, whereas unflanged males that are leaving that home, they do have a different experience, and so I'm. And that may actually parallel, and they may be and we may not be giving orangutans enough credit that unflanged males survive and they figure it out. So I think they survive and figure it out, but yeah.
Yeah, I haven't really observed a lot of male orangutans, but I think it's back to their different personalities, I guess. Like, we all know that orangutans have different personalities. Sometimes they wander around, sometimes they can explore far away from their home range, from their when they're born. And yeah, I think it's also back with their personalities.
That's very true. So right now we have about 400 different orangutans in our rehabilitation centers. I think we could say with a lot of confidence we have about 400 different personalities. So we keep mentioning personality, and we try to say it a lot too, and it really matters. They're just as different as any two humans.
Yeah.
But yeah.
What's the sex ratio of those 400? Do you have more males or more females? What do you have?
That's a good question. At the top of my head, I do have to say I don't have the exact numbers off the top of my head. Our numbers are shifting, though, unfortunately, where we're having a larger male bias with the years, because we've had over 2,000 orangutans come through our centers, and since 2012, we've released 485 orangutans, and that has been more females than males just because of distribution, right? We can't release as many males in the same area as females because females have smaller home ranges. So there's more males in our center, more of our unreleasable orangutan population is male as well. Larger flanged males who were rescued later in life who lacked the survival skills, because we don't release orangutans for several reasons. And unfortunately, one of it is orangutans who just don't have what it takes to survive in the wild. And we do hope that, if we could do something and by some miracle they do gather those skills, we can release them. So if you have tips for that, that'd be wonderful. How to teach a 20-year-old flanged male skills he never had in the 10 years he spent in captivity before coming to our centers, things like that. So our ratio is becoming more skewed, whatever it is.
Yeah, I think a lot. Well, yeah, I'm not sure a lot of captive or, well, it's different personalities, but because one of the questions beforehand that you sent to us, I thought was very intriguing about sort of what a captive orangutan like to, and I'm flashing back to some of my captive one that I think I said, I don't think some of those guys would want to do the work it takes to be a wild orangutan. It's somewhat easier. But then the other thing is that I do know some captive orangutans might like the autonomy, and not have to be living under the rules of a person. So yeah, I mean again that's a huge challenge and a tremendously honorable responsibility, and it's not cheap to do that, and so it's and to have to be doing more than one thing at a time. You're trying to rehabilitate to release some animals, and then you're also having to, how do you enrich a life of an animal that has to stay in captivity? So that's an even bigger job that's on your plate. So yeah, it's quite a challenge. Yeah. But I think that's one of the take-home messages I think we all learn, I've learned in a long time, and I'm very impressed with all the observations already that Sheila has for having a shorter time looking at orangutans. But they always are going to surprise you. They're immensely tenacious animals. It's one of the things I love about them. So you never can say, I wouldn't give up on anyone because they'll surprise you. Yeah.
Yeah.
That is very true. And I do want to comment, you mentioned a couple of times, Felicity, that this is a big challenge rehabilitating orangutans. And we have other big challenges as well. And we do see orangutan conservation as a multifaceted approach, right? So rehabilitation, hopefully it does right by the individuals in our program and hopefully can bolster conservation prospects a little bit, but we find it very important to protect the current wild populations. Without them, there's very little hope for the future of orangutans and give a high quality of life to the orangutans we do have in our care. Something which, with these older individuals, you mentioned individual personality, being motivated to put in the work. And a lot of times we see in rehabilitation programs, timing is really important. How young are they rescued from a human home? When are they ready to go back to the wild? How much time they get to spend in forest school on islands. Would you say, do you think there's any link between the slow life history of orangutans and how long they spend with their mother versus what really is the ideal length of time for them to be in a rehabilitation program? Is there an ideal length of time? Are there ages we should be looking for if the circumstances allow, of course? When we rescue adults, we don't have that sort of luxury. But for the ones who are rescued early enough in life.
Well, this is where I think rehabilitation for orangutans is very difficult, maybe more so than other great apes, but it's also difficult for them as well, because it takes a long time, and that's a big investment. And I a little bit see in some rehabilitation programs, I think that this push to make them independent and this sort of tough love thing that's done very early, and I know it's done because they're trying to make them not become dependent, but I don't know if that's really the way orangutans work. And but I don't know how you make the next step, which is how to break that. But I really think that some of the very young orangutans really do need one-on-one contact with and if it's not an orangutan, it needs to be a person. But then you do run the risk of building that relationship that you're then going to try to break. But like Sheila so wonderfully said, that the mother does become less tolerant as the baby is older. So there is a process that the orangutan mother is following to break that dependency. But my heart breaks a little bit sometimes for the younger orangutans that I see that are by themselves that's not the way a wild orangutan ever is. It's being carried by its mother all the time, and so that's But the investment of time is very expensive, and then I think the same with many animals that have been in captivity a long time. They come in with very different experiences. Some are very coddled, and others are really deprived and mentally unbalanced. So that's also really different. So you have to make an individual decision.
Yeah, it really depends. It really depends with the condition that the orangutans came into the rehabilitation. But if we talk about normal situation, let's say that the orangutans is healthy, and then they get enough nutrition, and then they come in a very young age. Like, let's say if they're like from the age 0 to 2, it's really common that they always being carried with the mother. So I think the intense contact with the surrogate mothers, it should be okay. But then we also need to understand that after a few years, like in the age of 3 and 4, and then like Felicity said, tough love. We need to push them away a little bit. If they don't want to go away, we need to push them away a little bit. And then actually, as the orangutans grows up, they tend to move a little bit further from the mother. Like they're gonna explore more and more as they grow older. So the mother and the infant have a really close bonding. Let's say we have a surrogate mother, the surrogate mother is gonna have a really close bonding with the infant. But seeing how the orangutans works in the wild, they do get separated by they grow older from the mother. And then when the mother know it's time for the baby or the infant to be released, to be independent from the mother is gonna push them away. So I think that's something you can apply with the rehabilitated orangutans to, when we see how they are capable of the skill that they need to survive. When they acquire that, then we need to do that tough love to push them away and then release them back in the wild. There's no certain ages because we don't know the capacity. We cannot really say what the number, what ages we can release them. We really need specifically seeing the ability of each orangutans, because it's going to be different.
So I'm gathering there's no one size fits all answer, but it's try to mimic the wild as much as the individual personality and skill set allows. So
yeah, and it's hard because you're dealing with a lot of numbers. So that's and it needs. I mean, it's really sad because it's an animal that grows up with a very individualized training, but yet you're dealing with lots of numbers. So that's the real challenge.
Ms. Jones, on our side, we do try to. We don't do. We don't think it's best right to have one surrogate mother per orangutan. Either it's too much of a human orangutan bond, but these classes we do individually track each orangutan and their skill set and their personality to try to customize it as much as possible for the individuals. And they are, I would say, assessed on an individual basis. Not graduated as a group. They're graduated when each one is ready. A couple at the same time, that's great. If it's just one, that's how it is. And yes.
Oh, I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just wanting to ask about that, because I know that in some other rehabilitation of great apes and also elephants, there's some programs where they very much put a one-on-one relationship in the very beginning. And I wonder, is that just because of numbers? You would have to have 700 employees if you did very young animals on a one-on-one, or have you found that not to work? Why you don't have that model?
I will say when they are very young, so we call them our nursery students, when they're under 2 years old, it is certainly more intensive than our forest school students. So in the area, the surrogate mothers, they don't leave them at night. They sleep with them in the house. They're there all the time. And when they're not with a surrogate mother, there's always a surrogate mother around, but they're in contact with other individuals in their group. And that's something we really.
Oh, I see. So it's not just 1-to-1. It's maybe one person to 3 animal or in the nursery group.
Yeah. So there's there too. And if there happens to only be one orangutan, then there would be one surrogate mother for that orangutan. But there are smaller groups with, a larger surrogate mother presence. And as they get older, there's then less. And there's a stronger push for, even though it's not as natural, we hope for learning from conspecifics are older individuals who, in a way, fill the role of an older sibling when specific forest school groups pass in the forest.
Yeah, one of the, if I may be so bold to say, I see a lot of bullying in rehabilitation centers in the older, which you don't see in the one, I mean, when but you don't see a lot of that playing. I mean, anytime a mother is near another mother, in my experience, and the babies will play. They just go and play. So they do play with other orangutans, but I don't. I mean, I've even seen a mother intervene when I think she thought the other one was being a bit rough on this other one. So, but in rehabilitation, I see a lot of bully behavior in these conspecific groups, which I think is nasty, and I don't know, and not what we see in the wild, which I wonder how do. I mean, do you see that, or is it me? Maybe I'm not interpreting. But is that a problem for you? Or?
We do see it. No, it's definitely there. I wouldn't say it's a problem. And now everything I'm about to say is quite speculative. But if something was to be very extreme, our surrogate mothers would intervene as well. And we have some orangutans who, have a more dominant personality, especially when they get older, and they'd be seen more as that bully, right? Individual personalities. I would say, if I were to speculate, I think it's because we have such, even when orangutans pass in the wild, right? They're only, depending on the relationship of the mothers, maybe a couple hours or a couple of days.
Right. Yeah.
Versus you're having so many individuals together all the time.
All the time. Yeah, that's a good point.
Maybe if wild orangutans were together that much too, you'd see a little bit more, and with that range of ages. So we try to keep under check, and we do watch our social groups, especially. So once an orangutan's done with forest school, we want them to go to a pre-release island. If there's not space there right away, they go to what we call socialization cages, where they live in these large complexes with other individuals. And if there are certain individuals that just simply do not get along, we will move them. We don't want to just, subject one orangutan to being bullied by another orangutan. So that is watched and monitored. And I would speculate it's probably just due to the frequency of social interactions.
Yeah, you're probably right. I actually didn't think about that. It's not the sort of 24/7 with another. Yeah.
I don't know if you guys have siblings, but I know when I visiting my sister, we're together too much, we start fighting too.
Well, that's always what you have in a wild situation. Even as Sheila was saying, when the older sibling comes by, when they've had enough, they leave. So
Yeah.
I take your point.
Those are great discussions to have, and this is how we continue to develop our knowledge. Because that's one thing I've noticed during this talk, which is fine, is there's been a couple of maybe this, but I don't know. And I think I don't know is such an important phrase, right? Saying I don't know. If you know what you don't know, you can try to learn what it is and work together to find a solution. Which, speaking of working together, I have so many more questions I want to ask you guys, and I'm sure there's lots of comments and questions, but I do know we're running out of time, and we do have to start to wrap up soon. So before we go, I want to ask you both one last question. We all have the privilege to work in the field in Indonesia and Malaysia, but most people tuning in today are not in these countries. They might be living in a big city. So do you have any advice for people who live in cities or elsewhere who want to support orangutans and their conservation and what they can do in their daily lives to help these amazing animals that we all love so much?
Well, for me, there are several things that, let's say, young people, like students or people living in the city, there's several things that they can do. For me, like, they can be a smart consumer, because we know the biggest threat that we face with orangutans conservations is the destruction of their habitats, and mostly the destruction of their habitats is like deforestation and then plantation and stuff. And yeah, like palm olive and stuff. And then if we can be a smart consumer and then start choosing products that is more environmental friendly, that probably could help, because it's a supply and demand. Where there is a demand, there's going to be supplies. And yeah, there's much thing also we can do. We can raising awareness, starting campaign with our own social media maybe, or you could volunteer if you have time.
That's a great one. I completely agree. Felicity?
I completely agree with what Sheila says, and looking after your own environment, because we're all connected. I just had a video that was given to me by one of my collaborators, and he's a sustainability officer in an oil palm company, and his 12-year-old daughter had a speaking contest, and she said, "We're all on one Earth. Mars, forget about it." And I loved it, because she said, we need to keep our Earth, don't litter, don't pollute, all of these things that are because even if you live in a city, you're still part of the same place. We may be working in different places, and there's pluses and minuses. You look from what somebody else is doing, you go, oh, I wish I was doing that, or so we're so looking after your Earth. And I think remembering for people who are very compelled when they see a picture of an orangutan, that the best orangutan that we're all working for is a wild orangutan living independent life, and that we need to learn to love them at a distance, which is when you are a field researcher, you never interact with your study subject, you are observing. So the things that Sheila said, what we were observing and I've observed, we don't have a interactive relationship with that animal that we're observing. We're watching and loving it from a very far distance, and we're not interacting. That's really different than what you have in a rehab situation. But so that type of loving a wild animal for being a wild animal, and separating in your mind what a pet animal is. Love your pets, love dogs and cats. They're great at that. But an orangutan doesn't belong as a pet, so that's an important thing to remember, that what type of love, we have capacity for a lot of type of love, and we need to love them in their home as the amazing animals that they are. And they're even more amazing when you have the privilege that Sheila and I have to see wild animals. And even if you never get to see a wild animal, that knowing it's out there is what we all want. And so.
Yeah, it's I completely agree. Like I've once heard the less interaction with the wildlife is the more successful the conservation is.
Yes. If you want to coexist with wildlife, which is what I do a lot now in trying to make in more and more peopled, mixed, oil palm villages, fragmented forest landscapes, coexistence means keeping a healthy distance from each other. This is my area, this is your area, and not actually doing things that encourage closer contact, because like feeding, especially feeding primates, there's nothing ever good that ever comes from that for the primate. So that, again, that's exactly what Sheila said. It's about maintaining that sort of distance if you want to coexist, actually.
Well, thank you both for your time today. All this amazing information, just ending on some really powerful messages there from both of you. So thank you, Sheila. Thank you, Felicity. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak with you both.
It's been lovely. Thank you so much. I mean, usually these kind, you think, am I going to enjoy myself? But it's been so wonderful to chat with you. Thanks so much for inviting me. And I look forward to hearing more from both of you in the future.
It's really a pleasure for me too. It's really nice having a chat with you guys. I learned so much from both of you. I'm really grateful to be invited in this event.
Thank you both, and thank you to everyone who's tuned in for this session. We hope you've enjoyed it as much as the three of us have. I'm going to pass you back to our moderators of the entire event, and happy Orangutan Day, everyone.
Yes!
Yay! Happy Orangutan Day!